Imagine being groomed your entire life for a single moment. The sacred bonding ceremony where your soul would merge with your destined mate. Now imagine that moment becoming your greatest humiliation, broadcast before hundreds of witnesses under the blood moon's merciless light. Tonight, you'll witness Luna's journey from broken girl to something far more dangerous. A woman who discovers that rejection can be the first step toward claiming a power that could reshape the very fabric of her world. But beware, for in the shadows of exile and revenge, she'll uncover truths that make her question everything. Was her rejection truly betrayal, or was it salvation? And when she must choose between the brother who cast her aside and the one who offers her the throne of darkness, which choice will damn them all? If you're ready to feel every heartbeat, every betrayal, every impossible kiss that burns like silver fire, hit subscribe and let the story begin. The sacred circle pulsed with ancient power, carved into the earth by the first werewolves centuries ago. Luna could feel the energy thrumming beneath her bare feet, the same energy that had witnessed thousands of bonding ceremonies, sealing mates for eternity. Tonight was supposed to be her night, the culmination of 18 years of preparation, training, dreaming. The white ceremonial dress clung to her skin like moonlight-made fabric, passed down through 7 generations of her maternal line. Every thread whispered promises of destiny fulfilled, but Kieran's golden eyes held no warmth as he stood before her in the circle's center, the blood moon casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow. Around them, representatives from 12 allied packs formed concentric circles, their breathing synchronized with the ancient rhythm that connected all werewolf hearts. Luna's own heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird as she reached for Kieran's hands, just as they'd practiced 100 times before. This is it, she thought. This is where everything begins. Under the witness of Luna's bloodlight, Elder Moira's voice rang across the clearing. We gather to bind 2 souls, 2 destinies, 2 futures into one unbreakable whole. The ceremonial words felt like honey and fire on the night air. Luna's fingers trembled as they touched Kieran's, expecting the familiar electric warmth of their connection. Instead, his hands were ice cold, pulling away from hers like she'd burned him. The synchronized breathing around them faltered, becoming a discord of confused whispers. Kieran's voice, when it came, shattered the sacred silence like a stone through glass. I cannot take this woman as my mate. The words hung in the air. Impossible. Unthinkable. Luna's world tilted, the ground beneath her feet suddenly uncertain. She carries tainted blood, a darkness that would corrupt our line and endanger our pack. His golden eyes, once warm as summer honey, now gleamed with something that looked almost like fear. I choose Serafina of the Northern Territories as my true Luna. The gasp that rose from the gathered packs was like a physical blow. Luna felt her knees give way, hitting the earth with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard Serafina's triumphant laughter, saw the elegant blonde step forward in a dress of silver silk that caught the moonlight like liquid mercury. How long have you known? Luna whispered, her voice so broken it barely qualified as sound. But Kieran was already turning away, his jaw set like granite, refusing to meet her eyes as Serafina's hand slipped possessively through his arm. The last thing Luna remembered before the world went black was the feeling of something cracking open inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper, older, more dangerous. Something that made every wolf in the clearing take an involuntary step backward, their nostrils flaring with sudden primitive fear. Luna's transformation came in fragments. Partial, painful, wrong. Her fingernails extended into claws that she couldn't retract. Her canine teeth elongated until she tasted blood on her own tongue, and her eyes burned with a light that wasn't the familiar gold of her pack, but something silver and strange. The gathered wolves pressed backward as she stumbled to her feet, their faces masks of horror and fascination. Monster, someone whispered, and the word followed her like an echo as she turned and ran. The forest beyond the ceremonial grounds was forbidden territory, ancient, wild, full of things that even werewolves feared to face. But Luna plunged into its depths without hesitation, branches tearing at her ceremonial dress, until the white fabric hung in tatters, stained with earth and her own blood. Behind her, she could hear the sound of pursuit beginning, Kieran's voice shouting orders, the shuffle of feet as tracking parties organized themselves. They're already hunting me, she realized with crystalline clarity. Less than an hour ago, I was their future Luna. Now I'm prey. Her partial transformation made everything wrong. Too sensitive, too intense. Every sound was amplified until the forest rang like a discordant symphony. Every scent hit her nostrils with the force of a physical blow. Every texture under her feet felt like walking on knives. But worse than the physical discomfort was the emotional maelstrom tearing through her chest. Rage, humiliation, betrayal, and underneath it all, a yawning void where her future used to be. 18 years, she sobbed as she ran, her words disappearing into the darkness. 18 years of my life, building toward a lie. The deeper she went into the forbidden forest, the more the very air seemed to thicken around her. Ancient magic slumbered here, disturbed by her passage. Trees older than memory groaned and whispered secrets in languages that predated human speech. And something else was stirring in response to her emotional chaos. Creatures that fed on despair, drawn by the psychic scream of her shattered heart. She could hear them moving parallel to her path, keeping pace, waiting for her to stumble. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Luna collapsed beside a stream that ran black under the moonlight, its water reflecting not her face, but something else entirely. A woman with silver eyes and midnight hair, wearing a crown of stars. "Who are you?" Luna whispered to the reflection, but the image dissolved as her tears hit the water's surface. That's when she heard the footsteps approaching through the undergrowth, deliberate and unhurried, belonging to someone who moved through the forbidden forest like he owned it. The man who emerged from the shadows was both everything Luna remembered and nothing like the stories told about him. Damon moved with the fluid grace of a predator completely at home in his environment, but there was no madness in his green eyes, no feral corruption that the pack elders described when they spoke of Kieran's exiled brother. Instead, she saw intelligence sharp as a blade, pain deep as winter, and something else that made her breath catch. Recognition, as if he'd been expecting to find her here. "Hello, little Luna," he said, and his voice was nothing like Kieran's commanding bark. It was whiskey and smoke, with an undertone that seemed to resonate in her bones. Rough night? The question might have been mocking from anyone else, but there was genuine gentleness in his tone as he took in her torn dress, her bloody feet, the way she clutched her arms around herself like she could hold the pieces of her world together through will alone. "You're supposed to be a monster," Luna whispered, studying his face in the moonlight filtering through the canopy. The family resemblance to Kieran was unmistakable. The same strong jaw, the same aristocratic cheekbones, but where Kieran's features were classically handsome in a way that belonged on recruitment posters, Damon's face told stories. Scars traced silver lines across his left temple, and there was a hardness around his eyes that spoke of battles fought and prices paid. "The stories they tell are mostly true," Damon interrupted, settling onto a fallen log with the careful movements of someone whose body remembered old injuries. "I did challenge pack law. I did kill 12 enforcers when they came to drag me away. I do practice magics that would make your precious elders shit themselves in terror." His smile was sharp as broken glass, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But monster is such a limited word. I prefer misunderstood." The creatures that had been stalking Luna through the forest began to emerge as they spoke. Things that shouldn't exist, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed like coals. But they didn't approach Damon. Instead, they formed a loose circle around the clearing, watching, waiting. Luna pressed herself backward against a tree trunk, her heart hammering with fresh terror, but Damon barely glanced at them. "Friends of yours?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything in this forest knows better than to threaten what's under my protection," he replied, and something in his tone made the circling creatures sink back into the shadows. "The question is, Luna Nightshade, last daughter of the moon-blessed line, what are you willing to become to get your revenge?" Damon's sanctuary was a revelation that defied everything Luna thought she knew about the exiled and the damned. The ancient elven fortress rose from the forest floor like something from a fever dream, its towers twisted with living vines that bloomed with flowers that only opened under moonlight. Magic thrummed through every stone, not the dark corruption she'd expected, but something older and wilder, the magic of growing things, of transformation, of possibilities that civilization had forgotten. It's beautiful, Luna breathed, following Damon across a bridge that seemed to be grown rather than built. Below them, the same black stream she'd seen herself in wound through gardens where herbs and flowers grew in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and something else. Ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes. How is it possible? The stories said, that I live in a cave like some feral beast? Damon's laughter held no humor. Stories have a way of becoming truth if you tell them often enough. It keeps visitors away, which suits me perfectly. He led her through halls lined with books that seemed to whisper as they passed, their leather bindings marked with symbols that shifted when she wasn't looking directly at them. Besides, isolation has its advantages. No one interrupts when you're trying to master magics that could level mountains. In a room dominated by a fireplace large enough to roast an entire deer, Damon gestured for Luna to sit in a chair that molded itself to her body like it had been waiting for her specifically. He moved to a cabinet filled with bottles of liquid that glowed with their own internal light, selecting one that swirled with silver and gold. What you experienced tonight wasn't rejection, Luna. It was awakening. His words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Your bloodline carries power that the pack elders have spent generations trying to suppress. Power? Luna's laugh was bitter as autumn wind. I couldn't even hold my transformation together. I fell apart in front of hundreds of people. Where's the power in that? But even as she spoke, she remembered the way the assembled wolves had stepped backward when her eyes began to glow. The fear that had flickered across Kieran's face when he'd refused to meet her gaze. Damon handed her the glowing bottle, and when their fingers brushed, Luna felt something electric pass between them. Not the warm familiarity she'd shared with Kieran, but something more dangerous. Raw, uncharted. Drink, he said softly, and let me show you what you really are. Let me teach you to burn down everything that hurt you. And when we're done, his green eyes held promises that were equal parts threat and seduction. My dear brother will learn what it means to reject something precious. The liquid fire Damon had given her burned through Luna's veins like molten silver, and suddenly the world exploded into hyper-real clarity. She could smell the magic woven into the fortress stones, could taste the age of the books surrounding them, could feel the heartbeat of every living thing within miles. But more than that, she could sense something awakening inside herself, something that had been sleeping her entire life, wrapped in chains of ignorance and fear. What's happening to me? Luna gasped, her hands glowing with the same silver light that now poured from her eyes. The chair beneath her began to change, wood sprouting new growth, leaves unfurling in patterns that matched the rhythm of her pulse. Around the room, the magical books hummed in harmony, their whispered words becoming a chorus that seemed to celebrate her awakening. You're becoming what you were always meant to be, Damon said, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. The blood of the first werewolf queens runs in your veins, Luna. The women who could speak to the moon itself, who could bend nature to their will, who ruled not through force, but through a power so fundamental that it predates pack hierarchies by millennia. He moved to stand behind her, his hands hovering just above her shoulders without quite touching. Your mother was the last to carry the full bloodline. That's why they killed her. The words hit Luna like a physical blow, shattering her concentration. The silver light flickered and died, leaving her gasping in the sudden ordinary darkness. My mother died in a hunting accident. Everyone knows that. The whole pack mourned. But even as she spoke the words, pieces began falling into place like a puzzle she'd been avoiding her whole life. The way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. The careful way people watched her, as if waiting for something dangerous to emerge. Your mother, Celeste, was 3 days away from fully awakening her abilities when she died. Damon continued relentlessly. 3 days away from becoming powerful enough to challenge the patriarchal structure that keeps wolves like Kieran in control. So they arranged a hunting accident, and spent the next 18 years making sure you never learned to access what she died protecting. His reflection appeared in the dark window, and Luna saw something she'd never expected in the face of Kieran's exiled brother. Genuine grief. You loved her, Luna whispered, the realization hitting her with stunning clarity. That's why you were really exiled. Not for challenging pack law, but for trying to save my mother. The truth rewrote everything she thought she knew about the man standing behind her. Everything the pack had taught her about good and evil, loyalty and betrayal. Damon's silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with old pain. I was too late to save Celeste, but I won't be too late to save you. The question is, are you ready to learn what your mother died protecting? Are you ready to become the weapon that will make them all pay? The ritual to unlock Luna's ancestral memories required blood. Her blood, mixed with water from the sacred spring that fed Damon's gardens. As the crimson droplets dissolved into the silver liquid, the surface began to shimmer like a mirror, and suddenly Luna was no longer sitting in the ancient fortress, but standing in a moonlit clearing 18 years in the past, watching her mother's final moments unfold. Celeste Nightshade moved through the forest with lethal grace, her silver eyes blazing with power as she faced down 6 werewolves in a clearing Luna recognized with sickening clarity, the same sacred circle where her own rejection had taken place hours ago. But this wasn't the Celeste of Luna's childhood memories, the gentle woman who sang lullabies and braided flowers in her hair. This was a queen in her element, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. You think you can stop what's coming? Celeste's voice carried authority that made the attacking wolves hesitate. The bloodline awakens whether you will it or not. She was magnificent, Luna breathed, watching her mother dance between her attackers with movements too fluid to be entirely human. Celeste's power wasn't just transformation. She was bending the very forest to her will, roots erupting from the earth to ensnare her enemies, trees bending their branches to strike like massive fists. But Luna could see what her mother couldn't. More wolves approaching from behind, led by a younger version of Alpha Marcus, Kieran's father. Your mother's mistake was believing in honor, Damon's voice whispered in her ear, though his present self wasn't part of this memory. She thought if she could prove her power wasn't a threat, they might let her live to teach you. She didn't understand that her power itself was the threat. To their control, their carefully maintained hierarchy, their fear of what wolves were before civilization tamed them. The ambush, when it came, was swift and brutal. Luna watched in horror as her mother's own pack, wolves she'd grown up with, trained with, trusted, surrounded her in a perfect pincer movement. The betrayal in Celeste's eyes as she recognized Alpha Marcus's scarred face was a knife to Luna's heart. For the good of the pack, Marcus said, his voice heavy with what might have been genuine regret. The old ways died for a reason, Celeste. We can't let them return. No, Luna whispered, reaching toward the vision as her mother fell beneath a coordinated attack, silver blood pooling around her body like spilled moonlight. She fought so hard. She was so strong. But even as Celeste died, her blood sank into the earth of the sacred circle, and Luna understood with terrible clarity why her rejection ceremony had taken place in that exact spot. They'd been trying to bury her mother's power with ritual and tradition, never realizing that some seeds only grow stronger when watered with blood. The vision dissolved, leaving Luna gasping and shaking in the present, her cheeks wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. Damon's hands were on her shoulders now, real and warm and anchoring her to the present moment. They murdered her, she said, her voice flat with shock. Not strangers, not rogues, her own pack, people who claimed to love her. Something was crystallizing inside her chest, hard and cold and absolute. And they've been watching me my whole life, waiting to see if I'd become a threat worth killing too. The training began at dawn, in a courtyard where the stones still held echoes of ancient magics. Luna's first lesson was simple in concept, impossible in execution. To channel her rage without being consumed by it. Power without control is just destruction, Damon explained, demonstrating with a gesture that made the fountain in the courtyard's center bloom with ice flowers. Your mother was powerful, but she never learned to be ruthless. That's what killed her. I don't want to be ruthless, Luna protested, even as silver light began to leak from her fingertips like liquid starlight. I want justice, not revenge. But when she thought of Kieran's cold dismissal, of the pack that had murdered her mother while pretending to mourn her, of 18 years of careful lies designed to keep her weak and ignorant, the distinction felt increasingly meaningless. Justice is a luxury for the powerful, Damon replied, moving behind her to adjust her stance. His hands on her arm sent electric currents through her skin, and Luna found herself leaning into his touch despite herself. Revenge is a tool for the oppressed. And right now, little queen, you are very much oppressed. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered, Now show me what happens when you stop holding back." The explosion of power that followed surprised them both. Luna's scream of frustration and grief tore through the courtyard like a physical force, shattering stone, splitting trees, sending shockwaves that rippled outward for miles. But more than destruction, it was creation. Wildflowers bloomed in the cracks she'd made, new growth spiraled up from broken earth, and the very air shimmered with possibility. When the chaos settled, Luna stood in the center of a transformed space, her eyes blazing silver, feeling more alive than she ever had in her carefully controlled pack life. That felt... Luna paused, searching for words to describe the rush of absolute freedom she'd just experienced. Like coming home. Like this is who I was always supposed to be. The admission terrified her even as it thrilled her, because she could feel how easy it would be to lose herself in this power, to let it burn away everything soft and human about her. "Now you're beginning to understand," Damon said, and there was something like pride in his voice as he surveyed the magical devastation around them. "Your pack spent 18 years teaching you to be small, quiet, controlled. They wanted a decorative Luna who would smile and nod and breed strong warriors. Instead, they created something they can't control and can't stop." His green eyes met hers across the transformed courtyard, and Luna saw her own silver fire reflected in their depths. "The question is, what are you going to do with all that beautiful rage?" Before Luna could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the forest, accompanied by voices she recognized with a chill of dread. Kieran had found them, and he hadn't come alone. Through the fortress gates, she could see torches bobbing between the trees, a hunting party, armed and determined. "He's really going to try to drag me back," Luna whispered, disbelief warring with fury in her voice. "After everything he said, everything he did, he thinks he can just take me home like a runaway child?" Kieran rode through the fortress gates like a conquering hero, his golden hair catching torchlight, his alpha presence radiating confidence and control. Behind him came 20 of the pack's finest warriors, including Beta Marcus and several wolves Luna had considered friends just hours earlier. But it was Seraphina's presence that cut deepest. The elegant blonde sat her horse like a queen already crowned, her silver dress pristine despite the journey through the forbidden forest. "Luna," Kieran's voice carried the commanding tone he'd always used when he expected immediate obedience. "Enough of this tantrum. You're coming home where you belong." His golden eyes swept over the transformed courtyard, taking in the evidence of her power, with what might have been alarm masked as disapproval. "Look what my brother has done to you. You're not yourself." "Actually," Luna said, stepping into the torchlight with silver fire dancing around her fingertips, "I think I'm more myself than I've ever been." The words came out steady and strong, nothing like the broken girl who'd fled the rejection ceremony. Around her, the fortress itself seemed to respond to her presence. Vines growing thicker, flowers blooming brighter, magic humming in harmony with her heartbeat. "The question is, who the hell are you to tell me where I belong?" The transformation in Kieran's expression was instant and telling. The confident alpha mask slipped, revealing something Luna had never seen before. Genuine fear. Not of Damon, though his brother had materialized from the shadows like a living nightmare, but of her. Of what she'd become in the space of a single day. "Luna, please," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The power you're accessing. It killed your mother. It will kill you too." "My mother was murdered," Luna replied, her voice carrying a finality that made several of the mounted warriors shift nervously in their saddles. By her own pack, by people she trusted, people who decided her power was too dangerous to exist. Silver light pulsed from her skin like a heartbeat, and Luna felt the intoxicating rush of finally being able to speak her truth. "Tell me, Kieran, did you know? When you were planning my rejection, did you know you were following the same script that killed my mother?" Seraphina's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Oh, this is delicious. She actually thinks this is about her." The blonde dismounted with feline grace, her own power beginning to manifest as frost that spread across the ground with each step. Poor little Luna. Still doesn't understand that she's just a pawn in a much larger game. Her pale eyes glittered with malicious amusement as she looked between the two brothers. "Shall I tell her? Or would you prefer to do the honors?" Serafina's transformation was nothing like the warm, natural magic Luna had been learning to wield. Ice spread from the blonde's feet in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly, and her eyes blazed with cold fire that seemed to leach warmth from the very air. But it was her voice that carried the most menace. Cultured, amused, completely without conscience. Did you really think this was about love, little moon child? About worthiness or bloodlines or any of that romantic nonsense? What are you? Luna demanded, instinctively stepping closer to Damon as predatory energy rolled off Serafina in waves. The woman she'd thought was just another pack daughter, another potential Luna, was revealing herself as something far more dangerous. Around them, the fortress walls groaned under the assault of competing magics. Luna's silver fire, Damon's wild shadows, and Serafina's crystalline death. I am what your kind calls a handler, Serafina purred, her form shimmering as illusions fell away like discarded clothing. Her human appearance dissolved, revealing someone older, more angular, with eyes like Arctic storms and power that tasted of ancient winters. We've been managing werewolf bloodlines for centuries, culling the dangerous ones, controlling the powerful ones, ensuring that your kind never again threatens the established order. Kieran's face had gone white as Arctic frost. Serafina, what are you saying? We're mates. We're bonded. You said, but his words trailed off, as understanding crashed over him like a physical blow. The confidence that had carried him through the gates was crumbling, replaced by the horrified realization of a man discovering he'd been a puppet, dancing to someone else's strings. Oh, my sweet Alpha, Serafina cooed, reaching out to stroke Kieran's cheek with fingers that left frost burns on his skin. You were so easy to manipulate. A few enhancement spells to make you believe you felt attraction, some mild compulsions to ensure you'd reject Luna at precisely the right moment, a whispered suggestion here and there about bloodline purity. Her laugh was the sound of icicles shattering. You never stood a chance against real power. Luna felt something rupture inside her chest. Not her heart this time, but something deeper, the last of her innocence, perhaps, or her faith in the world making sense. You orchestrated everything, she whispered, pieces of a vast conspiracy clicking into place with mechanical precision. The rejection, driving me to Damon, even my mother's death, all of it was planned. Power began to leak from her in dangerous pulses, turning the air thick as honey, making the ground beneath their feet tremble with barely contained force. But why? Damon's voice cut through the tension like a blade, and Luna realized that even he was shocked by the scope of the deception. What could you possibly gain from manipulating us like this? Serafina's smile was winter incarnate. Because, darling Damon, Luna isn't just any moon-blessed bloodline. She's the key to awakening every suppressed magical lineage in the werewolf world. Her full transformation would trigger a cascade effect that would return your kind to the power they wielded before we domesticated them. Her pale eyes fixed on Luna with hungry intensity. So we had two choices. Kill her like we killed her mother, or turn her into a weapon we could control. And weapons, my dear girl, are so much more useful when they don't know they're being aimed. The revelation of Serafina's true nature shifted everything in the space of a heartbeat. Kieran staggered backward from the creature he'd believed was his chosen mate, his face a mask of horror and self-loathing. Dear gods, what have I done? He whispered, his golden eyes finding Luna's across the frost-covered courtyard. Luna, the things I said to you, the way I thought they were my own thoughts, my own feelings. Irrelevant, Luna replied, though her voice lacked the venom it might have carried minutes earlier. Now that she understood the scope of their manipulation, her anger had crystallized into something colder and far more dangerous. What matters is what we do now. Silver fire began to spiral around her in complex patterns, responding to her emotional state with increasingly elaborate displays. How many others are there, Serafina? How many of your kind are pulling strings throughout the supernatural world? Enough, Serafina answered with casual cruelty, her ice magic spreading to encase several of the pack warriors in crystalline prisons. We've been shepherding your evolution for so long that most of you have forgotten you were ever wild. The werewolf councils, the vampire courts, the fey nobility, all carefully managed to prevent any single group from becoming powerful enough to challenge the natural order. Her laugh was like winter wind through dead leaves. You really thought your little supernatural societies grew organically? How quaint. Damon moved to Luna's side, his own power manifesting as shadows that writhed with predatory hunger. The attacks on the borderlands, he said, understanding dawning in his voice. The territorial disputes, the resource wars. You've been orchestrating conflicts to keep us fighting each other, instead of looking for the real enemy. His green eyes blazed with fury that made the temperature around them drop 10 degrees. How long, Handler? How long have your kind been playing puppet master? Since the last time your people tried to claim their birthright, Serafina replied, gesturing dismissively toward the fortress walls where ancient elven script glowed with renewed power. The old alliance between werewolves, vampires, and fae nearly conquered half the world before we stopped it. We won't make the mistake of allowing such cooperation again. Her pale gaze fixed on Luna with predatory intensity. Which is why you, little moon queen, will either submit to proper control or be eliminated like your mother. The threat hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Luna felt something settle inside her chest. Not rage this time, but purpose. The power that had been chaotic and wild began to organize itself, flowing through her body in patterns that felt older than memory. Kieran, she said without taking her eyes off Serafina, if you want to make amends for what you've done, now would be the time. When she turned to look at him, her silver eyes held depths that seemed to reflect starlight. Are you with me, or are you still her puppet? Kieran's transformation was visible, the confused, manipulated alpha falling away to reveal someone harder, more dangerous, shaped by the recognition of how thoroughly he'd been used. I'm with you, he said, and Luna heard genuine commitment in his voice for the first time in months. Whatever it takes to make this right. His own power began to manifest, golden fire that complemented rather than competed with her silver light. The fight that erupted in Damon's courtyard was unlike anything Luna had ever witnessed. Not the clean, ritualized combat of pack training, but raw, supernatural warfare where reality itself became a weapon. Serafina moved like winter incarnate, her ice magic turning the very air into crystalline daggers that shattered against Damon's shadows. But it was the way she fought that terrified Luna most, with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before, who viewed them not as opponents, but as livestock to be culled. You're thinking like prey, Damon shouted over the sound of splintering stone as one of Serafina's ice spears missed Luna's head by inches. Stop reacting and start hunting! His words triggered something primal in Luna's awakening consciousness, and suddenly she wasn't thinking like the careful, controlled pack daughter she'd been raised to be. She was thinking like the apex predator her bloodline had always been meant to produce. Luna's power exploded outward in a nova of silver fire that transformed the battlefield. Where her energy touched the ground, massive thorned vines erupted to entangle Serafina's movements. Where it touched the air, it created barriers of solidified moonlight that turned the handler's ice attacks back on themselves. But most importantly, where it touched Kieran and Damon, it created a connection, a shared awareness that allowed them to fight as a coordinated unit for the first time in their lives. Impossible, Serafina hissed, her composure finally cracking as she found herself pressed on 3 fronts simultaneously. The moon-blessed line was neutered generations ago. You shouldn't be able to access the battle magic of the ancient queens. But even as she spoke, Luna could feel more abilities unfurling inside her consciousness, like flowers blooming in time-lapse. The power to enhance her allies, to turn the environment itself into an extension of her will, to reach into the primal core of what made werewolves more than human. Your mistake, Kieran said, his golden fire intertwining with Luna's silver light in patterns that spoke of harmony rather than dominance, was thinking that broken things can't be reforged stronger. The young alpha who had been Serafina's puppet was gone, replaced by someone who moved with lethal grace and fought with the desperate intensity of a man seeking redemption. His power, enhanced by Luna's connection, carved through the handler's defenses like a sword through silk. The moment when Serafina's control finally shattered was visible, a crystalline network of compulsions and influences that had been wrapped around all 3 of them like invisible chains. As those bonds broke, Luna felt the full scope of how thoroughly they'd all been manipulated, not just in recent months, but for years. Every major decision, every relationship, every moment of pain or joy had been carefully orchestrated to serve someone else's agenda. "We were never free," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. None of us were ever free. As Serafina retreated to regroup, the sudden silence in the courtyard felt more ominous than the battle had. Luna found herself standing between Kieran and Damon, the three of them connected by threads of shared power that pulsed with each heartbeat. But the connection revealed more than just their current thoughts. It was opening doorways to memories that had been locked away, showing them glimpses of truths that the handlers had spent decades concealing. "The dreams," Kieran said suddenly, his voice thick with recognition. "The nightmares I've been having since I was 12. Wolves with silver eyes, a woman screaming as she burned, a child crying in a hidden room. They weren't dreams, were they?" His golden eyes met Luna's, and she saw the same horrified understanding dawning that was crystallizing in her own mind. "You were there," Luna whispered, pieces of suppressed memory surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. "The night my mother died, you were there. You saw what really happened." The connection between them carried more than words now. It was sharing actual memories, and Luna gasped as she experienced that terrible night through Kieran's 12-year-old eyes. In the recovered memory, young Kieran had been unable to sleep, drawn by sounds of conflict to a window overlooking the sacred circle. He'd watched in horror as his own father led the attack on Celeste, had seen the way Luna's mother's silver fire had turned desperate and wild as she realized she was surrounded by her own pack. But most damning of all, he'd seen the moment when Celeste's gaze had found his window, when the dying queen had looked directly into his young eyes and whispered something that the wind had carried to his ears. "Protect her. When she awakens, protect her." "The compulsion started that night," Damon said, his voice hollow with understanding. "They realized you'd witnessed their crime, so they buried the memory and began shaping you into the perfect tool for Luna's eventual destruction." His green eyes blazed with fury as more pieces fell into place. My exile, Luna's isolation, even our attraction to each other. It was all designed to create this exact moment. "But they made one critical error," Luna said, her power stabilizing into something that felt less like a storm and more like the calm before dawn. "They assumed that our feelings for each other were entirely manufactured. They never considered that genuine connections might develop despite their manipulations." She looked between the two brothers, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. "What we feel, all three of us, it's real, complicated and messy and probably impossible, but real." Serafina's laughter echoed across the courtyard like breaking glass. "How touching! The little puppets think they've found free will." The handler had regrouped during their moment of revelation, and now she stood surrounded by reinforcements. Other creatures like herself, beautiful and terrible and ancient beyond measure. "Did you really think I came alone? That I would risk the culmination of decades of planning on a single confrontation?" Her smile was winter personified. "You've played your parts beautifully. Now it's time for the final act." The army that emerged from the forbidden forest was a nightmare made manifest. Dozens of handlers in forms that shifted between human beauty and something far more alien, accompanied by creatures that shouldn't exist outside of the deepest supernatural fears. But it wasn't the size of the force that made Luna's blood run cold. It was the way they moved with the coordinated precision of those who had done this many times before, in many places, with many victims who had thought themselves powerful enough to resist. This is what happened to the other bloodlines, Luna realized, her voice barely above a whisper. The dragon shifters, the phoenix witches, the storm callers. They didn't just fade away naturally. You hunted them to extinction. Silver fire began to spiral around her in defensive patterns, but even her growing power felt insignificant against the force arrayed against them. "Extinction is such an ugly word," Serafina replied, her form now revealed in its true aspect, something that was beautiful in the way winter landscapes were beautiful, terrible in their perfect hostility to life. "We prefer optimization. My supernatural society is so much more stable when it's populated by beings who know their place in the natural order." Her pale eyes swept over the three of them with the satisfaction of a collector examining particularly fine specimens. "Your bloodlines will continue, of course, under proper supervision." Kieran moved to stand protectively in front of Luna, his golden fire flaring with desperate intensity. "Over my dead body," he snarled, and Luna could feel through their connection that he meant it literally. The young alpha who had been groomed for compliance was gone, replaced by someone who would burn the world before allowing her to be caged again. "That can be arranged," one of the other handlers said, its voice like silk over steel. "Though we had hoped to preserve both brothers for breeding purposes, the bloodline combination shows such promise." The casual way it spoke of their bodies, their lives, their futures as nothing more than resources to be managed, sent ice through Luna's veins that had nothing to do with temperature. No. The word came out of Luna with such force that it cracked stone and bent trees. Around her, reality itself seemed to pause, as her power reached a threshold she hadn't known existed. No more manipulation, no more control, no more treating us like livestock to be managed. Silver fire exploded from her in waves that made the assembled handlers take actual steps backward. "I am Luna Nightshade, daughter of Celeste, last of the moon-blessed queens, and I reject your authority over my people." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Around them, the very fabric of the supernatural world seemed to respond to her words. Magic that had been suppressed for generations began to stir, awakening in bloodlines that had been convinced their power was gone forever. In that moment, Luna understood what the handlers had really been afraid of, not her individual power, but her ability to awaken the collective strength that had been sleeping in the supernatural community for centuries. The transformation that swept through Luna was visible from miles away, a column of silver fire that pierced the night sky like a beacon, calling to every suppressed magical bloodline within a 100-mile radius. But it wasn't just power that was awakening in her. It was knowledge, memories that belonged not just to her mother, but to every moon-blessed queen who had come before. She could see the true history of her people now, the time before the handlers, when werewolves had been partners with dragons and allies to the Fae, when magic flowed freely, and the supernatural world knew cooperation instead of careful segregation. "I can see them," Luna gasped, her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual self. "All of them. Every bloodline they've suppressed, every power they've locked away. They're still there, waiting." Through the silver fire that now surrounded her like liquid starlight, she began to call out to those sleeping powers, her voice carrying on frequencies that had been silent for centuries. Across the supernatural landscape, the response was immediate and overwhelming. In vampire courts, ancient powers stirred in bloodlines that had been convinced their strength was purely physical. In Fae territories, wild magic began to bloom in places where it had been dormant for generations. Among dragon shifters who had been reduced to mostly human lives, the fire of their ancestors began to rekindle. Luna's awakening wasn't just personal. It was the key that unlocked the chains the handlers had spent centuries forging. "Stop her!" Seraphina's composure finally cracked completely, her beautiful mask dissolving to reveal something that was ancient and hungry, and utterly without mercy. "If she completes the awakening, everything we've built will collapse." The handlers' army surged forward in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers. But they found themselves fighting more than just 3 werewolves. The fortress itself had become an extension of Luna's will, its ancient elven magics responding to her call. Walls became weapons, gardens became guardians, and the very stones fought with the fury of a place that remembered what freedom felt like. But more than that, Kieran and Damon found their own powers amplified beyond anything they'd thought possible. Connected to Luna's awakening consciousness, they fought with abilities that belonged to the Alpha Kings of legend, commanding elements and reality with the ease of those who had never forgotten their birthright. "This is what we were meant to be," Kieran shouted over the chaos of battle, his golden fire now burning with the intensity of a small sun. "This is what they stole from us." Through their connection, Luna could feel his wonder as he accessed memories that belonged to his own bloodline, the Alpha heritage that the handlers had neutered generation by generation, until Alphas like his father believed leadership meant following someone else's script. "And this is what we reclaim," Damon added, his shadow magic weaving through reality like a living thing, creating barriers and weapons and impossibilities, with the casual ease of someone who had always known the world was meant to bend to his will. For the first time since his exile, he looked truly happy, not just satisfied or grimly content, but joyfully, fiercely alive. The battle for the future of supernatural society reached its crescendo as reality itself began to fracture under the competing magics. Serafina and her fellow handlers were fighting with the desperate fury of those who saw their carefully constructed world collapsing, but Luna could feel their power wavering as the awakening spread beyond their ability to contain. Around the world, the supernatural community was remembering what it meant to be truly free. But freedom came with a price that was becoming increasingly clear to Luna as her consciousness expanded. The moon-blessed bloodline's ultimate power wasn't just awakening others. It was the ability to burn away the supernatural bonds that the handlers had woven into the very fabric of reality. To complete the liberation, she would have to sacrifice the individual connections that had become so precious to her, including the bond she now shared with both Kieran and Damon. "There has to be another way," Kieran said, their connection allowing him to understand what she was contemplating. "We just found each other, all three of us. I can't lose that now." His golden eyes held a desperation that cut straight through Luna's heart, because she could feel through their bond that he meant it completely. The Alpha who had once rejected her was now willing to fight fate itself to keep her. "The connection between us isn't something they manufactured," Damon added, his shadows wrapping protectively around both Luna and his brother. "What we built together, it's real. It's ours. There has to be a way to preserve it while still breaking their chains." But even as he spoke, Luna could see in his eyes that he understood the truth she was facing. Some prices could only be paid in full. Luna looked between the two men who had become the center of her world, seeing them clearly for perhaps the last time. Kieran, golden and strong, and learning to choose love over duty. Damon, dark and wild and discovering that some things were worth more than revenge, both of them willing to fight impossible odds to protect what they'd found together. "I love you," she said simply, the words encompassing everything she felt for both of them. Both of you. Differently, completely, but absolutely. "And that's why I have to do this." The final working was beautiful in its simplicity, and terrible in its cost. Luna drew every thread of handler influence into herself, accepting the weight of centuries of manipulation and control, then burned it all away with the silver fire of her bloodline. The release sent shockwaves through every supernatural community on Earth, shattering bonds of compulsion and revealing truths that had been hidden for generations. But as the chains broke, so did her connection to Kieran and Damon, leaving her standing alone in the center of a transformed world. When the silver fire finally faded, Serafina and her fellow handlers were gone, not destroyed, but diminished, their power over supernatural society broken so completely that they might never recover it. The fortress stood in ruins, but from its broken stones, new growth was already beginning to emerge. And in the sudden quiet that followed the end of an age, three people who had loved each other stood apart, no longer bound by magic, but not yet sure what remained between them. "So," Luna said into the silence, her voice small and human and uncertain for the first time in hours. "Where do we go from here?" 3 months after the night that changed everything, Luna stood in the garden she'd built from the ruins of Damon's fortress, watching morning sunlight dance through leaves that grew in patterns no ordinary plant had ever achieved. The supernatural world was still adjusting to its newfound freedom, dragon shifters testing flight for the first time in generations, fey magic blooming wild in forgotten corners of the earth, vampire courts discovering that their power came from more than just blood and politics. She heard footsteps approaching through the garden paths, and smiled without turning around, recognizing the familiar rhythms of two very different gates. Kieran arrived first, as he always did, punctual and reliable, carrying wildflowers from the meadow beyond the rebuilt walls. Damon followed a few minutes later, as was his way, mysterious and unpredictable, with stories of distant lands and strange magic tucked into his smile. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, settling beside her on the stone bench that grew from the living rock itself. His golden hair caught the morning light, and Luna marveled at how young he looked now that the weight of handler manipulation had been lifted from his shoulders. "About freeing half the supernatural world from centuries of bondage?" Luna laughed, leaning into his warmth. "Not one." She reached for Damon's hand as he joined them, linking the three of them together in a chain that was purely human, purely chosen. "About choosing both of you despite what everyone says is proper or possible. Also not one. The pack elders are still scandalized," Damon noted with obvious amusement. "A Luna with 2 mates, ruling a territory that welcomes outcasts and rogue bloodlines. You've broken every tradition they hold sacred." His green eyes sparkled with the delight of someone who had always enjoyed watching the world burn, but now got to help build something better from the ashes. Good, Luna said firmly. Most of their traditions needed breaking anyway. She looked between the two men who had chosen to build this impossible life with her, seeing the future spread out before them like an unwritten story. Besides, we're writing new traditions now. Our children will grow up knowing that love is abundance, not scarcity, that power shared is power multiplied, that the only chains that matter are the ones we choose to wear. As if summoned by her words, the garden around them burst into bloom, flowers that had never existed before, growing in patterns that spoke of magic, freely given and freely received. In the distance, Luna could see other settlements like theirs beginning to take root, places where the supernatural community was learning to live without the careful segregations that had kept them weak and manageable. The world was different now, dangerous in some ways, chaotic in others, but alive with possibilities that the handlers had spent centuries trying to prevent. And at the center of it all, a woman who had learned that the greatest rebellion was not to destroy what had hurt you, but to become so luminously yourself that others remembered what freedom felt like. The revolution is just beginning, Luna whispered, her words carrying on a breeze that tasted of starlight and silver fire. And in the garden where impossible things grew daily, 3 hearts beat in rhythm as different as their owners, but as connected as the roots that fed the same soil. They say rejection is the end of one story, but Luna learned it was the beginning of a much better one, a story written not by fate or manipulation, but by the radical act of choosing love in all its messy, complicated, magnificent forms.